Or to the cloud. Okay. Welcome everyone. I am Denora Guzman, one of the CASA team leads. I am happy to have Jessica Neum. Is it Neum or Neum?
Neon.
Neum, from USCRI to give us a presentation about unaccompanied minors. Um, this will be the part one. Part two will be August 24th, also at noon, where she will talk a little bit more about trafficking. If you have any questions while she's making the presentation, you can put it in the chat box and we will take a moment to read out the questions. So go ahead, Jessica.
Perfect. Thank you. I also am welcome to, you can raise your hand. You can unmute. I definitely appreciate questions, especially as you all are out in the field. And I want you all to be able to walk away with helpful takeaways as you're working with this population in Tennessee. So I am curious though. You can raise your virtual hand, you can write in the chat, but I'm curious if anyone is familiar with the unaccompanied immigrant child population. If you've worked with this population before, you can do like a thumbs up, yes. You could do a thumbs no as no. Maybe you're not really familiar with them, and that's why you're in this training today. And either answer is okay. It also just helps me gauge how in depth I go in some areas. So I guess you could raise your hand if you've worked with this population before, if you like, or unmute chat. Great. Thank you. Okay, this is helpful. Thank you for the responses. Yeah. So that's helpful. So I know we have allotted about an hour here. Happy to stay on for a little bit longer to be able to answer any additional questions that you all might have. I'm providing an overview of unaccompanied immigrant children. Uh, and We're going to talk about best practices. I'll go over some of those objectives as well, but I want to highlight USCRI. I hope that you've heard of USCRI. We have several different programs. We're the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. So we have policy and advocacy. We do have some legal service providers. We have our anti-trafficking services. You may have heard of these. They're called TVAP and Aspire, which are for foreign national trafficking survivors. And we will dive a lot more into that in part two of our training in August. We have refugee service, international programs, and home study and post-release services, which is what I'm under. And those are the services provided to unaccompanied children. So our objectives is to really be able to share who are unaccompanied children, including some demographics. I have some demographics that are specific to Tennessee and Nashville in here. What are some reasons for migration, common experiences that UCs may face, uh, explain what ORR is, the reunification process, and what post-release services are, and really just be able to identify some key cultural considerations when you're working with this population. So it can really inform, the referrals that you're doing and how you're really supporting these families. All right. Time is already flying by, so I want to make sure we can get through this. So part one is unaccompanied children. Or who are unaccompanied immigrant children. So an unaccompanied child is someone who is under the age of 18 who is apprehended by the Department of Homeland Security either within the U.S. or upon entering the U.S., right? And they're without their parent or legal guardian and they're without lawful immigration status. Now, the majority of unaccompanied children I usually see here are reunited with a parent or other caregiver, which is called a sponsor after release from government custody. And we have in this definition that they can be apprehended either, upon entering, so that could be at the border, or we have seen some more internal, what we call internal apprehensions in the past few years due to increased immigration enforcement. So in turn, causing some children who are already considered unaccompanied to be unaccompanied children due to their parent or caregiver being potentially apprehended. Uh, so we see many unaccompanied children might be migrating with a sibling, they might be migrating with other individuals. But again, that definition is really without their parent or legal guardian, and then they would be defined as unaccompanied immigrant children upon entering the US. So some of the reasons for migration for many of these kids are maybe in home country, they are facing forced recruitment into different gangs. Maybe they're looking to just reunite with family. Maybe mom, dad is already here in the United States and has been living here for years, trying to set everything up, and now their child now needs to migrate here to be reunified. And that's one of the terms that you'll often hear me say throughout this presentation is saying reunification or reunified. They're also migrating, many of them are migrating due to the lack of educational opportunity or lack of opportunities, especially educational. In some countries, free education stops at sixth grade. And that's pretty shocking for many of us in the room, but it's also something really important to consider when you're working with some of these families because maybe you already have worked with this population. You may have noticed like lower literacy rates, right? Maybe you're providing documents in their native language, but they still are unable to read or are unable to communicate. And that can be due to some of those impacts of the education in home country. There might be fleeing abuse or community violence, extreme poverty, political unrest, which is a really common one as well, or death or loss of a primary caretaker. Maybe they were residing with a grandmother or another relative in their home country and that person passed. And now they have to go to the United States because there may not be any other family in home country and someone could be here. So again, we've highlighted some of the reasons for migration. So some of those pull factors, which I did share, are that family reunification, reuniting with family that they've been away from. The economic opportunities, maybe better education, better employment opportunities. Also, we have here smugglers and coyotes may profit for bringing youth across the border and provide them with inaccurate information about the U.S. immigration system. So it may be presented to them that they are automatically eligible for, like a green card, for instance, that could have been shared with them. And so now they have this like false hope that, hey, I'm going to come here and I'm going to get this green card, right? And not really knowing the ins and outs of the immigration system. Educational opportunities, what we talked about, and then safety, right? So if they're fleeing gang violence or gang recruitment, which is one we often hear about, um, they can feel as though it's much more safe here in the United States. All right, so we can imagine what some of those risks can be. I think I have a map here on the next slide. So I'll go to this first. So you can just imagine if we see a lot of our kids coming from Guatemala. So even if you look at this map of Guatemala and just the migration journey of going all the way to the United States up here, which is in gray, it is an extensive journey, right? Many by train or by foot. And so some of the risks that many of our kids face or extortion, kidnapping, sexual violence or assault, physical assault, human trafficking, and we'll dive more into that, like I said, in part two, but that can look like, okay, well, I brought you to this river or to this location. Now you want to get across the border. I can get you across the border, but I'm going to need to exchange like something of value, or it could be a sex act in order to exchange to be able to make it through the remainder of the journey. Maybe they might run into gang or cartel violence. They may be abandoned by smugglers. And of course, we can consider the terrain and the desert temperatures and lack of just water and food. So these are all really important factors to think about when you're working with this population as well. Like, right, we're thinking of the reasons they're migrating. We're thinking about now the journey that they're going through to arrive to the United States. And so just it's helpful to really understand that context when we think about the supportive services we're giving and the trauma that they may have faced or some of the experiences that they may have had. So I had mentioned we see a majority of kids coming from Guatemala. This is national data right here. So this is 2025. We see about 35% of kids coming from Guatemala, followed by Honduras, Mexico, El Salvador, and other can be Haiti, Venezuela, for instance. We also see here that we have about 63% boys and 37% girls. I'd be curious, you guys can put it in the chat too if you have an idea of maybe why you think we might be seeing a few more boys migrating here. You also see about 15 years old to 17 years old is the majority. So we're seeing a lot of boys from Guatemala who are over the age of 15 to 17 migrating to the United States. Based off what I said, what do you think are some of those reasons? Exactly, to get employment in the US and send money back home. Exactly. And when we think about some of those cultural gender roles, I'm already jumping ahead, but some of those gender cultural roles, there could be this pressure to have to provide for family, right? As the man of the family, they may be considered already like an adult type at 15 or 14 and needing to send money back home. Thank you for that response. So we already went through the age. So I want to talk a bit about what the Office of Resettlement Care and Reunification process looks like. And I want to first highlight some of the agencies that are involved. Oop, we lost the emblem there with unaccompanied children. Right. So we just talked about why they're migrating to the United States. So we are up to this point where they are at the border and are now interacting with the US government and federal agencies. So it's important to have a clear distinction of the different agencies. There's the US Department of Homeland Security, which has several agencies, which I'll highlight in a minute. There's the US Department of Health and Human Services, and there's the Department of Justice. So in summary, DHS handles apprehensions and transfers. HHS, which is in the middle, handles more of the placement and care, and DOJ handles the immigration proceedings. Right? Because as I said at the definition of unaccompanied children, they are here while they undergo their immigration proceedings to determine what type of forms of legal relief may be available to them while they're here in the United States. So the Department of Homeland Security has CBP, Customs, ICE, and USCIS, which USCIS handles those applications for relief, such as asylum, for many of the reasons for migration that we saw. ICE is responsible for carrying out immigration law, and CBP is usually the agency that first encounters and apprehends unaccompanied children at a point of entry, or like I said, those internal apprehensions. All right, and then where the Office of Refugee Resettlement stands, it's under HHS, the Administration for Children and Families, and ORR. So you'll hear me use the term ORR throughout this presentation as well, and I'm referring to the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And so ORR is really prioritizing care and placement and services. All right, I know that was a lot, so bear with me. Please continue to write any questions in the chat as you think of them. Happy to clarify anything that comes up. So ORR custody and release, let's walk through the process. So I've shared the child now, let's say, is presented at the border and is now faced with Customs and Border Protection. So the child, can then say, I'm, seeking asylum, or I am here for X, Y, these various reasons. The child is then placed into ORR custody within 72 hours of being apprehended by DHS. Once they are in ORR custody, which means a shelter, a case manager is going to work with the family to identify who their sponsor is here in the United States. And then the sponsor vetting process now begins, which I'll dive into. And if the sponsor is approved, then the child is reunified with this family or this sponsor. And after discharge, they can receive post-release services, which I'll also speak about. So what does ORR care look like? And so when I talked about that shelter, we do have the Flores Settlement Agreement, which ensures that the children are placed in a least restrictive setting until they are able to determine their sponsor. We have seen an increase in processing times due to some changes in the vetting process. It's more extensive changes to the vetting process. Therefore, we've seen an increase of an average of about 100 plus days of kids being held in care. And you can also just imagine um, that's about 3, 4 months of a child being in a temporary placement until they're able to be reunified. So as you think about your roles and how you're supporting these kids, if they've also experienced being in a shelter for an extensive time, waiting to be reunified can also be challenging for some youth. So some of the services that they can receive while they're in the shelter are medical exams, school assessments, so there can be some grade placement, mental health services, recreation. They can get a legal screening, and of course, a safe and timely family reunification. So for any of you all, some of this documentation may be helpful, right? You may actually need to access a grade placement test that was given while the child was in shelter. You may need access to immunization records. And so communicating with ORR and the family to try to get any of those records if you need them in your work. So reunifying with a sponsor. I've been saying this word a lot too, and I can quickly go through this. The way ORR frames it is there are 4 different categories of sponsors, right? And so they're going to go through it in that order. So if a child is now in ORR custody in the shelter, they're going to say, okay, do you have your mom or your dad or a parent here or a guardian? No? Okay, we're going to go on to see if you have a sibling, a grandparent. You're going to go to category 2, maybe cousins. Okay, if that's not identified, they're going to go to category 3, godparent, distant relative, unrelated. We see family, friends, maybe leaders in faith-based organizations also offering to help sponsor many of the kids. And then we also have category 4, which is maybe there was no sponsor identified. Maybe they've exhausted all options, and that is where we see or our long-term foster care being explored. So um, children whose parent, oops, if no sponsor is available, these children may be referred to, like I said, to the long-term foster care. It provides stable family-like setting while the child's immigration case is pursued and until reunification is possible. So ORR does consider potential for legal relief, age, emotional needs, and settings when choosing a placement. But similar to foster care rules, it's that be under the age of 17 and 6 months, and they're expected to be in the shelter for an extensive time. Okay. All right. So sponsor vetting process. I had shared that we've seen some recent changes in the sponsor vetting process. And so typically how this looks is there are going to be interviews with family members. It could be family in home country. It could be family here in the United States and with the child to determine who the viable sponsor is here. And I went through those different categories. Right. It's also to make sure that everybody is comfortable and aware. Um, of who the sponsor is. They have to show proof of identity, proof of relationship. This can be a birth certificate, it can be other identifying documents. The sponsor is going to be screened for safety concerns. So that may involve reviewing past child welfare reports, allegations, or law enforcement systems. Background checks, like I said, are also performed. The public record search, the sex offender registry as well is checked. And a home study is now required for all cases before they can be placed into a home. Home studies are going to look a little bit different than probably what you all are familiar with in the child welfare realm, but it is a case manager similar to what we have in our agency that goes out, speaks to the families, reviews the home, and provides a recommendation if they think the home is suitable for the child. And assess the safety, assess the sponsor's ability to care for the child. So that's another piece that I'm going to highlight. Educate and prepare the sponsor and family for the responsibilities of what sponsorship looks like. That's another piece I want to share with you all. Unlike foster parents, there is no financial benefit or component that is given to sponsors, right? These sponsors are willing to care for this child without receiving any financial benefit. So again, as we were talking about maybe some of those pressures to be able to help to provide, the child may be feeling this pressure to have to help support maybe the family that they're residing with, if it's not their immediate category one sponsor, for example. And in part two, we can talk a little bit more about how we can see, unfortunately, some exploitation happen with some of these kids.
Hey Jessica, we
Yeah,
have
sure
a
thing.
question in the chat. How often are, when they are turning in the paperwork and doing the interviews and all this stuff, do we have any numbers of how often some of the family members are getting detained or deported during the process?
I don't have numbers for you, but what I can say is we have heard instances as part of the vetting process where immigration enforcement has been appearing in some of the interviews that are being conducted. We've also seen a decrease in sponsors being willing to come forward to sponsor children due to the hesitancy of sharing the information as part of the background, as part of the vetting process. We have many mixed status families where some members may be undocumented or some members may be undergoing their own legal immigration proceedings. And so we have seen a decrease in sponsors being willing to come forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. Thank you for that question. I do have some numbers, I think, in a little bit where you'll be able to see some of the number differences, at least for Tennessee from last year to this year of how many kids are migrating or being reunified in Tennessee. So it's important for me I keep throwing around that word sponsor. It's important to distinguish the difference between a sponsor and a guardian. And so a sponsor is really agreeing to take care of that child. If they were approved by ORR as the official sponsor, a sponsor then signs that sponsor care agreement, which I'll highlight in the next slide. And they also are agreeing to really try to have legal guardianship at some point of this child or make efforts to try to be that legal guardian. A guardian is actually going through the legal process assigned by the court and by family court to be the official legal guardian and have legal rights of the child. So here's what I was talking about with that sponsor care agreement. These sponsors are agreeing to provide those basic needs, food, shelter, clothing, medical care, education, enroll them in school. Like I said, make those efforts for legal guardianship, ensure the child attends all court hearings. This is very important, especially if you all are working with this population as well. It is very important that the child attends their court hearings. We have seen some of them be virtual. We have seen some of them actually be expedited. For a while, it was taking months to have a court hearing. We've seen some instances where they're notified in a week that they have a court hearing. So it is very important that, addresses are updated or they're looking on the official website, and I can make sure I send over any resources you all need, but there is a website to be able to check on the status. So we always encourage families to check that daily to make sure they're not missing any correspondence. Notify DHS if there's knowledge of criminal activity, but the one I really want to highlight too here is report child abuse or neglect, report if they're missing. And the big one here is notify ORR if they're no longer able and willing to care for the child. Now we know what we've seen recently is some of these are due to apprehensions, right? So maybe this family does not have a family preparedness plan. And so if the sponsor is apprehended, there may not be a caregiver that has already been identified because that was more sudden. But there are situations where the sponsor should go ahead and make arrangements on who would be the next person to care for them. But we see, unfortunately, there are some instances where there may not be another option. And that's where we see some kids entering into care. So And it sounds like Nashville has is explores all options and will bring them into care if necessary.
Yeah, Jessica and I talked about this. She mentioned that some states they won't even take child abuse reports if the child doesn't have a legal status. We're kind of a little bit blessed that Nashville does it way differently. But just to keep that in mind, when we are working, especially with the family members of the children that we are serving.
Thank you. So I don't know why this second image isn't, this first image isn't coming up, but this first one is essentially just, they call it a carta de poder, which is basically like a power of attorney, which is so you may see this document when you're working with families, right? It's basically designating that this parent could be in home country, and they provided this document that says so and so is able to take care of my child in Nashville, Tennessee, while I'm here in Guatemala. You might also come across this verification of release form, which we also call a VOR. This is also another way. I know no one's an investigator in this room, I don't think, but this is also a way to be able to verify who the sponsor is, who ORR has them listed as a sponsor, right? So it will say name of sponsor, it'll have a photo of the child, and the address. And so these are some documents you might come across when you're working with a unaccompanied child. Okay, so you'll see here in this map, these are the primary areas that we're seeing unaccompanied children be released to. So, right, they were brought in, placed in or a shelter. We're trying to figure out what sponsor they're going to go to, and they'll go throughout the United States. You'll see the darker color is where we see more releases to, where there's Texas, California, Florida. But if I hover over here over Tennessee, again, mind you, 2015 to 2025, there has been 25,000 releases of unaccompanied children in Tennessee and in that 10-year period. So that's something to also think about, that you most likely have worked with this population, or and there's probably still many unaccompanied children residing in Tennessee. So actually, here's your numbers for Tennessee. So unaccompanied children released by country of origin. So this is from 2015 to 2023. You see here 90% Guatemala. I don't know if you've all have noticed that you've seen a large Guatemala.
I think we lost you, Jessica. Can you hear me? Mm, Jessica, can you hear me? Okay, let's give her a second to see if it comes back. Does anybody have any questions so far? And you can unmute yourself if you need to. Oh, let me see if she comes back in.
I'm
Okay,
here.
you're back. Okay, perfect.
I should have probably given a warning that they're doing construction right outside of here, and they have hit the electricity at least twice. So
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
so sorry, y'all.
No, it's fine.
Um, Let me just make sure my presentation goes back up.
You know, these things happen. Yesterday I
Yeah.
lost power 3 times in a row.
Oh my goodness, has it been storming there?
No, it was just random. Our neighborhood, I think they're having issues with the power lines, and it was like constant. Just like, oh Lord.
Yeah. Okay, I'm on a hotspot now
Okay.
because my Wi-Fi has not come back.
Mhm.
Actually, my electricity has not come back. So
Okay.
that is why I can't pull up my other screen. So thanks all. Thank you all. I apologize. So I am going to try to switch my screen around so I can make sure you all can see. And please let me know, interrupt me if I start getting choppy because I'm on a hotspot.
Okay.
But what I was asking is, we have 90% of Guatemalan population in Nashville. And, I'm wondering if you've also noticed you have many families you're working with that are from Guatemala.
Yeah, we have encountered a lot of families recently that are Guatemalan, and like I said, speak indigenous languages. And I remember when I was doing PRS, most of my clients
Mhm.
were Guatemalan.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing. So yeah, we have large Guatemalan, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, and then actually followed by China, which is going to be in this smaller category over here. I have the numbers for you all. I apologize, but now not having both my screens is throwing me off. So can you see my presentation though now? Can you see my presentation? Yes.
Yeah, we can see it. And when you hovered
Okay.
over the colors, it showed the number.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, there are some um for the releases, we had about, I don't want to estimate. Let me stop sharing for a minute and I want to get you the number that we saw of releases in your state. Okay, so Davidson, oh, this was for population for female or male. So we actually have it was 2,500 in Davidson County males, and then 1,149 females during the same time frame, just in Davidson County alone. The other piece I wanted to highlight for you was in Tennessee in 2025, there were 235 releases of unaccompanied children to your state, and 2026, there have been 35. So, also just seeing some of the changes in the numbers and releases that we were talking about earlier. All right, now I will get back to screen share. And we can edit your recording so we
No,
can
it's
take these
fine. This just
blurb off.
adds color to it.
Uh, every time I go to full screen mode, it hides the zoom though. All right. Sorry, everybody. All right, let's try this a different way. You're going to not see it in full screen for just a moment while I then get it into full screen mode. There we go. All right, we're good.
Let me see. It's still saying, okay, we got it.
Perfect. Okay, we should be back on track and hopefully my electricity comes back on. All right, so the language is spoken at home in Davidson County. So I got this from a census report from 2025, but it's showing data from 2022. You do see that there is large just English speaking community in Davidson County, but also we have followed by uh, Spanish. We're going to also say that that other is going to be those indigenous languages. And the number was about almost 9,000 of speak another language besides what's highlighted here. And remember, we said there's a large Guatemalan population, many of them speaking indigenous languages. So this is going to be captured under the other. We also talked about how you have a Chinese population there as well. And so you'll see that language also highlighted here. So just the importance of that language access, which I'm going to be talking about at the end. So we've really talked over there are boys who have been released over the age of 15 from Guatemala speaking various languages and those indigenous languages. So I want to highlight post-release services. So you've heard me talk about it. I said I work under the HS, which is Homesteading and Post Release Program. Post release services are case management services that are provided and offered to all unaccompanied children upon release from the ORR shelter. They are voluntary and they are free services, but we highly encourage them to help support and navigate the following areas listed on this slide. You'll see placement and family stability. I have a slide on this. HSPRS is our PRS programs are unable to assist in identifying new placement, um, but just help with the stability and like the reintegration or just acclimating into the new home and culture and society. Education, medical care, legal, trafficking, mental health are many of the components that we address. I will also share at the end, in order to request post-release services, you contact the ORR hotline and you would say, I would like to request post-release services for this child. It's important to be able to verify that was an unaccompanied child before making that request to ORR. And the way that you can do that is when you're talking to them, or if it's in some of the documentation, you'll probably see their verification of release letter, or you could just say, like, talk them through like how they got here and if they were placed in a shelter before they lived with their, caregiver. Those are just some examples where you're able to confirm. We have different levels of PRS services, so it can depend on the needs of the case. That's essentially what this slide is saying. We could do a 6-week services, we could do 6 months, or even longer. And TVPRA are kids that have been identified as victims of trafficking or having a disability or have a disability. Here's that slide I was talking about placement disruptions. Once they're released, really, kids now fall under local jurisdictions of child welfare systems. So if there's a placement disruption, that is where the child welfare is intervening to try to find an alternative placement. Okay, I can pause there for a minute. Do we have any questions?
Yes, Sarah posted in the chat, is it still safe to request post-release services?
Yes. Yes, right. And so what we say too is the ORR, if the child has been identified as an unaccompanied child and went through ORR, their documentation is already within the ORR system, right? The details of their case, their name, the logistics of who they were released to is already in that ORR federal system. And so that's why I was just sharing, just ensuring that that child was an ORR, was a ORR eligible population and identified as an unaccompanied child. And please request post-release services. It is really helpful for many of the families that we're working with. And it can help be an additional support who's also familiar with with resources but you all are in this training to
Question.
also be able to be more versed on unaccompanied children.
I have one more quick question. And actually, this doesn't technically apply to like the kiddos that would be in CASA, but I'm just generally speaking. Once the child turns 18,
Mhm.
are like all bets off at that point as it relates to how they got to the country? Like, is there some protection once they are over 18 because they came in as an unaccompanied minor?
So that is where we're going to be speaking about some forms of legal relief. There are several different forms that are more common with our population, but it's important for them to work. I'm sorry to give you such a generic answer, but it is important for them to work with a legal attorney to determine their options post 18, right? Because they may have been awarded a legal relief. And in different states, and forgive me, I didn't look that up for Tennessee, the age of majority might be 21 in some states. In some states, it's 18. So that can look a little different.
And Sarah, also, if they were in DCS custody, DCS has to provide them legal relief. I don't know how long ago they turned 18, but there was a ruling last year that DCS has to provide them immigration legal relief.
That's amazing. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. I mean, we've worked with people beyond unaccompanied kids beyond 18, right?
Yes.
We had a lived experience council at one point where we had some kids that were over 18 and really providing us some insight on services and their experiences, which was very valuable. I will go into the considerations and best practices now. I hope you all join part two, but you might hear some of this be repeated just because it applies for both sections we're talking about. And so, cultural considerations for supporting unaccompanied children and their families, these are some things to really think about when you're working with them. And is, I don't know how many clinicians are in the room too, but just understanding the level of family separation and interrupted attachment that they may have experienced and for how long, right? They may have just been reunited with a caregiver. Um, and maybe that is why there is ongoing conflict and now child welfare systems are involved, right? Um, Maybe there's truancy concerns. Maybe this child is now feeling this pressure to have to provide, and maybe they're no longer going to school. As we know, there are other unfortunate cases that can come about regarding abuse and trafficking in different reports that we see. Um, but what I really wanted to highlight is the different like family dynamics and how it can take time to really understand the different roles in a household. We have some unaccompanied kids that may have been placed with that family friend that they may not have met, right? And so being able to recognize that this shift can take time, that the rules in the house may not all be agreed upon. And again, that interrupted attachment of maybe they were with their caregiver for some time in home country. Maybe they were separated. Maybe immigration enforcement was now involved in the United States. And now you all have had to now take this child into state care. So now thinking about that other component of interrupted attachment, if that was an example that happened. Barriers for sponsorship and guardianship. I think we've highlighted that one a bit of some of the challenges of people wanting to come forward or being able to be a guardian. The parentification. So we see this often where maybe teenagers, 13 to 16, might be taking care of their siblings, maybe missing school to take care of their siblings during the day. This is very common culturally in home country that they can be the caretaker. But it's something to also keep in mind when you're getting some of these reports, or, maybe, or you guys are working with families where they may have had inadequate supervision or concerns about the caregiver not being present. We can take a step back and think what part of this is cultural. They may also, we've talked about wanting to provide. Maybe the boy feels like he needs to be the man of the house and take care of all his siblings, help even take care of mom and things like that. Indigenous backgrounds, we've also talked about like culturally and through the language, the importance of making sure you have language access. And I understand how limited it can be in Tennessee. We use a program called Genie. I understand that there are various verification process and vetting that needs to happen for language tools, but that is the one we've been able to use to help with those indigenous languages because we know things can get lost in translation. We can't make the assumption that the child from Guatemala that you might be working with speaks Spanish and that you can talk about serious things in Spanish, right? I know we've probably all been, I used to live in South Florida and I remember I went to a doctor's appointment. The doctor was speaking to me fluent in Spanish. I'm like, wait, I can do enough, but not about my medical history, right? So it's very important that you have that language access. The culture stress and shock. So especially thinking about if you now are working with a kid who is now placed in state care or state custody, now if they're living with a foster family, and maybe they've had various placements over a short amount of time, something else to factor in your support, right? The trauma related to the migration and the family, maybe some of those family connections, maybe they're still wanting to stay engaged with some family members in home country. And then the collectivism. This is the idea of that the community is working together to support each other as well. Especially we've seen this increase in the past year or two of really trying to help each other in sharing resources, ride sharing, childcare, different ways of just working together. Okay, so some barriers to accessing services. So as you're putting in referrals or you're supporting these cases, these are some of the three that I really wanted to highlight. And, I'm not sure of all the financial support that you all provide some of the families, but in my time in child welfare, I know that there was some gift cards and things that were able to be provided to families. But I want to highlight the stigma culturally around mental health. Right. So we've all just been talking about the trauma that many of these kids face. And if we now say, okay, well, you've experienced trauma, I'm sending you to a therapist as a young boy. You're going to meet with this therapist twice a week now because you've seen something horrific and you've been separated from your family multiple times and now you're in state care or you've experienced some extreme abuse. Now you need to go to like a counselor. How do we think that kid's probably going to respond, especially if he's a teen? He's probably going to say, no, I don't need it. I'm strong. And it could be seen as a sign of weakness, especially in the Latino culture, right? It might be, we actually created a video on this that the dad, they may have been brought up thinking, that's just weak. I can't share my feelings. I need to be strong. So just being mindful on how it's being presented and providing that supportive language, like, I've worked with many kids that have experiences like you. That does not mean you're weak. This just means we can like talk through some of these experiences. I understand how hard this is that you've been separated, like acknowledging these things and normalizing that it's okay to speak to someone. We've talked about language access. I'm going to skip that one and go to the financials and lack of insurance. We see this as a major barrier for many of our families in accessing any care and services, is not having the financial means or the benefits and insurance to do it. So they may be hesitant to um, attend any of the services. And I actually am going to speak about some of the other impacts. So we know impacts on families and caregivers within the child welfare system. They may feel any of the following or have some challenges with the following. First one is difficulty attending appointments, right? So the child welfare system the child may have been removed and now they have several expectations or requirements in order to be reunified with their child. It's important to think about, how are they getting to these appointments? Do they understand what's being read to them or told to them? Because remember, we talked about those literacy rates at the beginning too. So check for understanding. And how long is the case now taking because of some of those challenges, right? So advocating as best you can. A lot of my child welfare work was in Florida, and I was always in that courtroom, like doing the best I could. So difficulty attending appointments. This could be the work. Maybe they need to go to work. Maybe the transportation. Maybe they don't have public transportation. I'm not familiar with public transit in Nashville. Is there any? Yeah, okay.
This is
Um,
not good.
okay. And scheduling. So, and then again, confusion about requirements across agencies. Maybe they're just unfamiliar who does what. So it's so important to also make it clear on like what your role is and how you support. And one of the biggest things that our teams do now too is make that clear distinction of immigration enforcement, supportive services, and if law enforcement does have to get involved in a case, again, making that distinction between the various roles. And again, we've seen an increase in fear and uncertainty about systems right now, right? And so that goes along with what I was saying of being clear as best you can of the next steps and what this process looks like. We all know we cannot make promises to kids, right? We don't know the overall outcome, but just being transparent on the next steps can really help have a sense of control, especially when many families are fearful of systems right now and what information sharing is happening. Something I'm going to be highlighting in a training that we're doing next week is the importance of our documentation and how our words and our language matter, especially if they follow child welfare cases, right? Maybe it does end up going into an immigration court and what some of our notes that might get, when I think of like protective teams, maybe not, case managers, but what information will then be shared and could potentially be harmful for a family's case.
We
Go
have
ahead.
something similar, we do court reports whenever we have any hearings, and so it is important to be factual and important to also, change our language depending on who's reading it. But that is something that we have to submit with the court, and the judges, they do read it. So they know, they can see what they've been doing, our CASA advocates have been doing.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, that's very helpful because it's our language matters, right? And I have another slide. If you join my session next Tuesday, which I'll talk about at the end too, we're doing a session nationally open to all child welfare, but really focused on child investigators and prevention teams, where yeah, it's like instead of saying this mother was uncooperative, maybe she was really hesitant to share information because she didn't know where it was being shared or who it was being told to. Or maybe they were undocumented and the hesitancy there. So just some things to consider when documentation. I have so many things on one screen. Okay, we have about 5 minutes. So I was like, I don't even know what time it is. But we've been talking through trauma and, some of the reasons for migration, but it's so important for us to talk about the strengths and protective factors and the resiliency of this population. We talked about that collectivism. They have social supports, family, friends, the culture, bringing aspects of their culture with them to the United States, food, clothing, traditions, are all things that you can all tap into when working with these families of, what makes, especially if they're missing home, what would help make it feel like home is here with you? Like, what can I do? What can I bring? If it's even printing pictures or, ordering something that could feel more authentic from home. Obviously, the immigration relief component can be a protective factor. Goal setting with them. What are goals that they have here in the United States? What are goals that they see for themselves in school, the career, maybe sports, maybe extracurricular activities? Maybe they want to attend a faith-based course or attend church every weekend. Maybe that is a form of strength for them, even in home country. Again, those personal characteristics. Maybe they have strong leadership skills. What clubs can we get them into in school to really have that support? And then the education and supportive environments, of course. Trauma-informed care, I assume we all know some of the importance of trauma-informed care, but really recognizing the trauma that they've experienced, establish that physical and emotional safety, that trust and transparency. I spoke about that earlier. Respect the culture and the family dynamics, um, and being obviously sensitive to especially, any of the cultural backgrounds or identities or concerns that they have right now. From my understanding, we're also seeing some increased immigration enforcement in many areas. So also being mindful of that and even talking through the family preparedness plan. Has your, like I know these kids are in care, but like just talking it through, especially if they were in care because of a parent being apprehended. Okay, key tools and resources. I will I don't have my other screen, but we'll make this work. But here's some of those forms of legal relief. I'm going to talk about it in part two as well. Asylum is often found an option from fleeing abuse. I'm sorry, from fleeing persecution or harm. SIJS is probably the most common one you all will see because that is for kids who have been abused, neglected, or abandoned by one or both of their parents. And so typically, if they are in state care, this will be the legal avenue that will be pursued. It can take, like many of these forms of immigration relief, it can take years. Um, but there are some protections to support them while they're in the process. T visa, trafficking visa if they've been identified as a victim, and the U visa if they've been identified as a victim of other crimes. Oh, oh, we don't have time for my little animated
Yes.
video. I love our animated video, but maybe next time. I will share this information with you. It's about contacting the OR hotline for case-specific questions or if you need to request post-release services. I really want to highlight the UC Resource Center for you all. If I can, I will when I get off the screen. Basically, the UC Resource Center is a hub of resources for families and providers. You will see I'm going to try to do it. Let's see if I can. Let's see.
I can try to share the link.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Can you see my browser though?
No.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Stop share. Start share. Here we go. Thank you. All right. UC Resource Center right here.
Got it.
Perfect. So you'll see here that we have a section for families and providers. We have many of our resources are in Spanish. We are working on continuing, I'm talking about importance of language access. We are working on and getting many of our documents interpreted. We have Haitian Creole for many of them. We are working on different indigenous languages, and we have our Refugee Youth Resource Center too, which has many of their resources translated in many common languages. So you'll see here we have our immigrants' rights page, which is one of the ones that is most visited right now. And you'll see it provides videos and handouts. The videos are loading right now, but it will have handouts as well that you can share with families of what happens if there's ICE interactions or immigration interactions at home, in the car, what to do. That family preparedness plan I've talked about. We also have information about mental health. We actually have a mental health toolkit that is visited, that's probably one of our top visited as well, talking about therapy and accessing different services. Here's that toolkit right here. I want to just go over to the providers section. You guys can explore that family section more of all the resources. We have tons on trafficking too. Um, for the providers, I want to show you two things. One, here's repatriation. This is if someone wants to go back to home country. So if in case you have any situations like that, you can review those materials. But I want to show you our directory. So this is a resource directory. We are almost, you can see the dark blue is all the resources that were completed. So we have thousands. So you will type in Nashville or Tennessee, you're going to pull up various resources in your area. You can specify what exactly you're looking for. Is it a legal provider? Is it education? Is it, mental health services? And we have a full list that you can also share. Do I have another minute before people start logging out?
Yeah, you do.
Okay. It's a marathon. Okay. And the other thing I want to highlight is our life skills sessions. So I will share this link. This is basically, we do live life skills oh my gosh, once a month. We did one on independent living. We're doing part 2 on August 6th. They are held in Spanish right now, and they are for youth and families that are Spanish speaking to be able to join on several topics. So independent living, like housing, what to do with housing, hygiene, opening up a bank account, medical appointments, and importance of being on time, like things like that we address. We are doing we do a Know Your Rights once a quarter. We're doing a mental health, and we're also going to be doing a digital literacy and internet safety one later this year, just so you can have an idea. So this is an SMS sign up. So like I said, I'll share this link. You share it with families. They can get alerts directly to their phone, which includes the Zoom link. It's all virtual. The other thing I want to highlight is I talked about this next Tuesday. My colleague and I are going to be doing a presentation for child protection teams. Please join. We would love for you to join. We're going to dive in more in depth on child welfare. I know that will be make it 3 presentations that you have to sit in with me speaking, so that is up to you, but please at least share it with your teams. Happy to have you in those. Okay, let me go back to the presentation. We are wrapping up right now, so I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy to hear what is a major takeaway that it's always helpful for me to hear what is a major takeaway that you have from today that you can now apply to your work. I also have a survey I would love for you all to fill out with a QR code, and we can also send it via email.
Yeah, I'm planning on sending an email to the team leads to have them share it with their teams with all of this information.
Perfect. So you can see the takeaway question, right? Okay.
Yes.
So I will pull up the survey in the meantime, and I would love to hear any questions or takeaways, like I said, that you have. I know that was a lot of information, so even if you need to like digest it and ask questions later, that is okay too.
I'm sorry, this
And
isn't a takeaway, and I was maybe a little late. I'm Sarah. Sorry, I'll turn my video too. So you might have even addressed this in the beginning. I'm sorry. It's 5 minutes late, but can a kiddo come across the border with, say, a relative and then go to their family here in the States and then say they do get removed for whatever reason? Are they a part? Are they considered a UC at that point? Does ORR get involved at any point in there? Or is this a completely separate, like ORR would be separate from their DCS case?
Yeah, great question. So the moment they are apprehended by DHS, it sounded like the example you just gave was that they came across the border with a relative.
Hmm.
They were, I'm assuming, apprehended by CBP, been placed in ORR custody. Yes, that would be considered an unaccompanied child.
But if they never say they were never apprehended,
Okay. Yeah.
I think I'm actually now like, let's assume they were never apprehended,
Hmm.
but now they are in DCS care.
Hmm.
Then does ORR get involved or no?
Now, there are some situations where I was saying there might be internal apprehensions, or there may be situations where OR has become involved. We understand that some kids migrated here more undetected and were not apprehended. So I was given some of those examples to kind of gauge like how to ask if this child
Mhm.
went through an ORR shelter to be able to verify if they were already identified and are already in the ORR system.
Okay. Because it sounds like it's actually a benefit, kind of, yes, to be a part of the ORR system, even if you then move into DCS custody for a different reason. I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out maybe how ORR could get involved, or if it has to happen in the beginning upon arrival in country.
Yeah, so I'm gonna stop. I stopped the recording for the question aspect. I hope that was okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
No,
Also,
no.
asking too much.